Hello everybody, welcome to another MRC tutorial. This week we are talking about how to configure VirtualBox to be used with an Ubuntu installation with an Ubuntu ISO. I have had the best experience with using the x86 version, even though my the native machine is a 64-bit operating system. I always suggest using the 86. It's less of a footprint, and unless you're doing really high-end stuff, you don't need it to be a 64-bit operating system. And if you do need it, then you're probably not going to be using a VirtualBox, and you'll just go ahead and make Ubuntu the native operating system. So let's go ahead and get this started. Now, the downloads for this, you just go to VirtualBox, not virtual, but VirtualBox, Bo. All right, so this is made by Oracle, is actually the proprietor. And you just click, it's really nice. They have whatever your separate, whatever your native operating system is, whatever your host, and two terms to be mindful of from here on out. You have host and you have guest. Host is going to be whatever your native operating system is, and guest is going to be what is running inside of VirtualBox. So I already downloaded this, and you can come right here and actually already installed it. So just for thoroughness, we'll go ahead and install this. It's only going to take a minute or so. While I'm here, you should also grab the VirtualBox extension pack. And what this does is gives you nice things like support for USB. It's also going to allow you to, of course, remote desktoping, but it's also going to allow you to make your installation full screen. And I'll show you guys how to do that in just a moment. This one I do have downloaded. Downloaded. That one's going to be right there. While this is finishing up, we'll go ahead and go to Linux, pardon me, Ubuntu, should do it. So if you go to downloads, and what we're going to want is just the regular Ubuntu desktop. You come here, you choose which one, 64, 32-bit, and say this one 32-bit. We're using 14.0.4.3 with a long-term support, and the reason why I chose this one instead of the newer 15.04 is strictly because this is a long-term support. It's going to last longer. This is not the stable version yet. It's still just the, I don't think it's quite beta, but it's not the long-term support candidate as with the 14.04.3. So, you download that and go ahead, donate some money should you want to, or you can just go ahead and say, not now, take me to the download, and pay them with support of their product. So, all right, so this is coming in now, and this one's going to take a little bit longer, but I'm actually going to cancel this because I already have that one right here. So I went ahead and grabbed both of them prior to this video, but this one is just going to be running the i386, which is also the x86. And okay, so by now VirtualBox is done, so we can just go ahead and if you clicked on that and you don't already have it installed, it'll walk you through the startup, the installation for that. It's just straightforward. I don't think there's any settings to configure, but once you have it installed and you run it, you're gonna have something that looks like this. Sans this. This is the one that I was playing with before this video. But what I'm going to do now is go ahead and start a new one. Hold on one second. Thank you very much. So what we're going to do now is make another one called Ubuntu. I'll just call this one Ubuntu sample. And the type is going to be Linux. So Ubuntu is one flavor of Linux. The way that I think of Ubuntu is as it's not quite the same thing, but you have different operating systems for either Windows or Mac. Like you have Windows 10, Windows 8.1, Windows 7, or you have Leopard or Maverick or Yosemite, whatever is going on with Apple. And you have different versions of Ubuntu the same way, but you have, there's Ubuntu, there's Kubuntu, there's Mate, there is a whole number of different Linux iterations, and some of them it's just simply the graphical user interface is different, but some of them are built for specific tasks.
Like on a Raspberry Pi, when you have all those options when you start with, and it's like each option is specified for some task that you may want it to perform, right? I mean, or not, depending, but it's...
Absolutely. That's a perfect example. Like some of them, I think it's either Ubuntu or Kubuntu, but that one is like dedicated towards hacking. So if you wanted to have a more secure system with less accessibility from an outside machine, you would go with that family. Or if you want to do something that was more math intensive, there's a scientific application of Linux. And that kind of stems from the fact that Linux is an open source operating system. That if I felt so inclined and had the skills, I could go home and I could write my own version of Linux and have it be tailored to the tasks that I want it to do. Ubuntu is kind of just a nice, friendly introduction into the system. And it's a great operating system. I think certainly there's some good and some bad, but as far as just a first introduction to Linux, it's the way to go. It's also the most supported. So now when I click on Create Virtual Machine, so again, I selected it's Ubuntu sample is the name, Linux is the type, version is going to be that 32-bit version of Ubuntu. So I click on Next now, and this is going to be dependent on your native machine. So for this machine, I have 8 megabytes of RAM, so I could go all the way up to 8 megabytes, and that would put all of my host PC, all of the performance possible into this virtual box. So because we're doing this recording and just so that the PC runs cleanly, and it still needs to be able to run this virtual box application, I'm going to put it right at the edge of the green, right around 5 megabytes. And then I'm going to click Next. So create a virtual hard disk. Do not create a virtual hard disk or use an existing virtual hard disk. So you want to create a virtual hard disk, and now you have a whole bunch of options. So what I like to do is just a virtual hard disk. Now, the difference between this and the VirtualBox disk image is that this actually physically takes up space on your hard drive. So you need to be careful that you're not allotting 15 terabytes when you don't have it, or even something less insane, like maybe you don't have 50 gigabytes. So you need to figure out what you have on your machine and what's still going to leave you a comfortable operating room. Actually, just going to go here and come here. And why can't I open that? Okay, well, this will do. So you can see I have 55.1 gigabytes free. So just for this one, I'm going to go ahead, click Next, and make it. So you want to make it a fixed size as well. And Ubuntu sample, and 8 gigabytes will be just fine for the purpose of this tutorial. Now, the reason why I prefer this storage system is because it's a heck of a lot faster. You actually are allocating memory on your hard drive to this. It's not having to do any of this mapping or any of this virtual space. It's actual memory on your PC. So we can go ahead and create it, and it's going to take a moment now depending on what type of hard drive you have and of course your computer. It's going to look like it hangs, at least on my system. It doesn't show much of an increase in percentage, but pretty soon it's just going to say, okay, I'm done. So I'll just hold on for a moment to this. Now once this is done, we'll go through and configure the settings for this. There's some that are pretty useful. And welcome. Got a new person coming in. So we're setting up the VirtualBox right now, and it just finished up allocating the memory for this specific instance.
Linux seminar.
So now that we have this, I actually just double clicked, but I didn't mean to do that, so I'm going to cancel this because I want to set up my configurations first. One of the nice things about this VirtualBox is you just shut it off and it's done. You can select what you want to. It doesn't actually have to shut down. It just unmounts that from whatever space you have allocated for it. So you can see now this is the general overview of the settings so far. I'm going to go into settings and configure a couple ones that I've come across. So nothing really is going to change in that general. But when I go to system, you can see how much memory you allocated. If you want to enable EFI or IO, APIC, anything along these lines, you certainly can. We're not going to do that now. If you have a multiple CPU process computer, you can go ahead and allocate even more memory for it. And acceleration, not going to do that either. So now, one of the things with Ubuntu is if you do not enable 3D acceleration, and if you don't enable 3D acceleration, you're going to have a very laggy experience. It's just, for whatever reason, I've literally been sitting for 20 seconds before a terminal window will pop open. So this will and of course, the experience does depend on how much RAM you can allot this machine,
right.
But this little ditty will help out a great deal. So I'm also going to go ahead, I've got some to spare, so why not bump this up to 80 megabytes of video memory, just have it a little bit of a better experience. Some of the other cool things that you can do is video capture. You can set the VirtualBox to start capturing video as soon as it's launched, which is actually great for things like this. And if you have some other thing that you want to record from the screen, you can do it right through your VirtualBox.
So, Travis, let me ask you a question real quick.
Yeah.
Could I run any operating system through this VirtualBox on a computer? So, say I had a desktop at home, super powerful, right, and it has I get enough space to run, say, instead of Boot Camp, run a Mac operating system inside my Windows, right?
Absolutely.
Cool.
So if you see some of the other tutorials about VirtualBox, you'll see this whole thing is going to be filled, and they'll have 10 different distributions of Linux.
But their hardware is probably great, right?
You need to have it. Now the thing that's nice though is if you're using them simultaneously, you need to have really powerful hardware. But you can just set this up. And if you just like diversity and you want to use Windows 7 one day, Windows 8.1 the next, Windows 10 the day after that, well, you can certainly do that, and you're not going to have the footprint of all of them running in parallel. But you can just kind of pick and choose, and if you have different applications, and just to play around and see what operating systems are out there. So, good question.
Yeah, I like that. Cool.
So now we're going to go to storage, and this is going to be where we mount our ISO of Ubuntu. So we're going to click on this empty and come over here. So ISO it's kind of like it's what you would burn onto a CD or a DVD, or even onto a USB flash stick. If you wanted to, one of the other options is dual booting your machine, which is actually, my native PC is dual booted. So I have when the computer starts up, it gives me the option to either go into Windows or to go into Ubuntu. And what's nice about that is that it has all of the system's power available. So if I'm doing something, for me personally, if I'm really doing something with Ubuntu, I actually have a partition on my computer that can go into that. But before I committed to dual booting the machine, because it is a more rigorous process and a much more unforgiving process, I went ahead and I made sure that I had made sure that I worked out any kinks with installing Ubuntu and just playing around with the file system in VirtualBox before doing that.
Okay.
So we're going to click on this, and we're going to say choose virtual optical disk file, and wherever you downloaded the Ubuntu ISO, for me it's just right to downloads, you're going to want to go ahead and click on that. And again, the i386, we're using the x86 version, so you open that and you're good to go. So you click OK. And now that has been mounted. You can see this IDE secondary master is that version of Ubuntu. So now some of the other settings is, okay, So this is one of the other things that's really cool too, is you can do shared folders. So you could create a folder, and you could make it, I'll call it on, let's say, over here, documents. I'm going to make a new folder in my documents called shared VB for VirtualBox. I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to auto mount it, and now click OK. So now what this means is that if I'm working on something in my VirtualBox, I can access it from my host PC without having to transfer files back and forth. It's just a shared space that both places can access. So I'm going to say OK. We're actually going to come back to some of this stuff in a little bit, but for just the initial setup, we're good to go. So we click Start, and now the Ubuntu is going to power up. So it's going to take us through just the straight installation procedure. It's pretty standard and pretty quick and painless as far as operating system installations go. Now you're going to see maybe you have auto capture turned on if you're using a laptop. All that means is that you can travel between your host PC and your guest PC without having to tell the computer, well, now I'm in my guest PC. You can just interact here, or I can interact here. So there's some things that came up. It was like, oh, blah, blah, blah about the BIOS. That's just it setting up, because right now there's just scratch memory space and what it's doing, and there's not truly a BIOS, and it kind of has to implant a BIOS on top of it. So I'm going to click Install Ubuntu, and of course, any language that you may like. You can say try Ubuntu, but this is how you would probably go about trying Ubuntu if you were trying to do like a hard install on your actual computer, trying to do a dual boot or something along those lines. That's kind of a way to ease into it. But we're just going to go ahead and click Install Ubuntu, and good. There's 6.5 gigabytes. I'm plugged in, connected to the internet. Now I'm going to say download updates while installing. It's just one less thing that I have to do. You don't have to run updates later on. I don't really need the third-party software right now, so I'm not going to download those. And the reason why they're not checked automatically is if I didn't connect them, if I didn't check them, it would be a slow. If I did not check them, it would be a quicker installation process.
Right.
So, but I'm going to download the updates. Actually, I'm not, so I can show you how to do updates later on. Okay. So this should go through pretty quickly. And okay, erase disk and install Ubuntu. Oh my goodness. Yeah, you're going to go ahead and do that. There's really nothing on the disk right now. If there was another operating system, it would detect it. So if you were installing side by side, if you're trying to install Ubuntu as a dual boot, it would say, hey, Windows 10 found. Do you want me to delete this whole thing and install fresh, or do you want to set up a dual boot?
That's what it asked me earlier.
Yes. And you can do encryption and all sorts of other fancy things, but for right now, I'm just going to click Install Now, and this is going to format the disk. Some of the partitions you created are too small. Please make sure the following partitions. I'm just going to say Continue. Again, one of the nice things is if this fails, we start it over.
Right.
Eastern time zone, where we're filming right now. Well, it says New York, we're actually down in sunny Florida. Keyboard layout, English is the default. And now you can go ahead and select your username. I'm a big fan of Calvin and Hobbes, so I use Calvin. And my computer's name is Duplicator. So now what this is the name is kind of just like what, it doesn't really have an impact on what goes on later. I mean, it might, that's beyond my knowledge, but I don't believe that this has any significant impact.
Yeah. The name of the computer, is that going to get put on where that, like the drive space we allocated for this computer, that's what it'll be named in my host, I guess?
Not so much. More what this is for the Linux file structure.
Okay.
So it's going to be more inside of Linux than it is on your host machine.
Okay.
And we can kind of come ahead and check over here. We have this. So I actually have I do have, actually this one. Yeah. So I'm checking to see, actually, that question. If the answer to that was yes, it would show up here as duplicator because I already have one.
Right.
But it doesn't. So maybe it shows up someplace else, but I believe that this is more for inside of the Linux operating system. So then you pick your username, same as my name, why not? And then whatever password you so desire. Okay. Okay. Close. Okay. So it looks like there was not enough space because of so there's not enough space because we selected only 8 gigabytes of memory, and the default configuration for Ubuntu required more than that. So what we can do, it's pretty nice, is come here, and I'm going to go ahead and go to settings. Go to storage. I don't think so. No.
I was a little earlier.
Check. What am I looking for? So one of the other things that we can do is just delete it. Now I'm going to delete all of the files, everything, and that's done. And now we can make this all anew. So again, Ubuntu sample, and go to Ubuntu 32-bit. Next, going to go up to the same amount of memory. I'm just going to blast through these instructions pretty quickly now. So I'm going to say create a new one, virtual hard disk, next, fixed size, next, Ubuntu sample, and now this time around I'm going to go ahead and make this 16 gigabytes, and we should be all good. So we could have gotten around this one at the Ubuntu script where it's like, do you want to erase disk and install, do something else, or one of the choice at the bottom was do something else. And with that choice, you can actually set up the size of the specific partitions, because there's the root file system. There's actually like 3 or more partitions inside of the Linux operating system that kind of store, where you put your files, where the bootloader is, and just some of the other really low-level hardware, where the other low-level items are, and you can allocate the size of those. So if I'm guessing that the issue was that the default size of those added up to something greater than 8 gigabytes.
Right.
But you could just shrink them down. If you only had 8 gigabytes to work with, you could shrink those down. Because Linux doesn't need more than a gigabyte max.
Yeah. Considering I run it on a Pi.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it can't be much.
No. So again, just going to go through these settings real quick. System, accelerate. Yeah, we're good here. Display, enable 3D. Bump this up to 80. Tell you what, today is Back to the Future Day. This is the day that Marty McFly and Doc Brown, so we're going to crank this up to 88, and maybe we'll go to the future.
Yes.
Yes. So, once again, just going to mount this, and it's nice it already auto-selected that, and the shared folders, I'm going to add that same one before, as before, other, and this was under U, documents, too far, and the name of it was shared VB, right there, okay, okay, and we should be good to go now, alright, okay, and start, test 2, so again, this is just booting up, and while this is loading, I'll share a Ubuntu fun fact. Each one of the releases has got named a different animal. So this one is tar, which is a type of ram or goat. It's kind of like a horned goat. And the long-term support is called trusty tar. In particular, 15 is the vivid verid, which I'm not sure what the heck that is, but I believe it's in the rodent family.
So it's only obscure animals, I guess.
Only obscure animals,
Nice,
yeah,
nice.
pretty much. Okay, so we're going to go through again, and I'm going to erase that. Install Ubuntu. So this something else over here. So you can see now there wasn't an issue. It wasn't like, oh, this has to be bigger. This just popped up. I'll tell you what, we can go back just to show you. You could select something else. You click continue. So this is going to end up making a partition table. Now this is just what's left, but I'm not going to mess with this right now. I'm just going to do clean install with the default configurations. Continue.
And like you said earlier, that partition table is where you could shrink the files down
Absolutely.
so that you could run it on less.
Yeah.
Cool.
And you can do a lot of things there too. Like if you wanted to keep different aspects of your documents or like of your root file system in actually different partitions, that could be used as a security measure, which you could do that there and break it up into different pieces. You could set up, you could dual boot your VirtualBox installation or your, you could dual boot your Ubuntu instance so that when you loaded it up, it could go into 2 different operating systems. But you're not going to worry about that today. That's when you could incept your Ubuntu operating system pretty much.
So that's what was really going on in Inception.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so again. And I'm going to click it to log in automatically. This right here is the tar. That's a trusty tar, if I ever saw one. Not only does it look like he's a hairy animal, but there's kind of like a heart around him. Like you just gotta love that tar. Trust him. So trusty. Okay, close the initial setup. Now it's going to go through the next phase of that setup. Gives you a cool little overview of what you can expect to see once you're inside of the operating system. So while this is going on, just more little fun facts about Linux. I find that Linux is either the easiest and most straightforward thing to use, or it's just the biggest headache. And that's the difficulty, I think, with the open source thing, is that if you're doing something that somebody's already done, then you're golden because they've already gone through the configuration and it's, there's already supported places to download their application or their configuration, and you just kind of go from there. But if you need to set up your Linux system in some way that's not run-of-the-mill, well, you can kind of be on your own, or at least it's between you and the Ubuntu forums. And it's nice that you can configure systems to do different things, and that's why you go to Linux over Windows, is because sometimes you need to I've been in situations where I had to physically recompile the kernel for the operating system because we needed to have access to a networking protocol that wasn't enabled in default. And you have access to that in Linux while you don't have the access to that in Windows. So Windows is kind of like you get what you got. If there's You can download a driver, great, more power, keep on trucking. But if you can't, well, that's kind of the limitation of the system. But with Linux, if you need to do something that's not enabled by default, if you can figure out a way to do it, you can do it. So pretty much once this is done, we'll be through the first part of this tutorial. We're just going to do pretty much a quick test, and we should be good to go. And we'll go through and get all of your guys up and running.
Give it a try.
Yeah. Okay, installation is complete. You need to restart the computer in order to use the new installation. Restart now. It's nice, it actually only restarts the virtual machine. It doesn't have to restart my host machine. So now one of the things that you might be noticing, and guys, you'll find this interesting too. So this right here is the size of the screen. This is the default size, and I don't think this is quite 640 by 480. But once this comes back up, I'm going to show you how to full size it. Because even if you go to view full screen mode or switch, well, well, yeah. So it makes the window full screen, but it doesn't actually make where you're interacting full screen. So I'm going to come back down to traditional size, and this is, I'm going to just exit out of this and start it back up.
This is the resume workshop. After this meeting.
Okay, so now this is not working. Well, actually, there's trying to be some. Okay, so now here we go. Just took a moment while it refreshed, but so now, yeah, you can see again. So the default hotkey for, they call it like the host key, is the right control. So you can go Control F. This is not the resume workshop.
Oh, what is this?
This is how to use Ubuntu inside of a virtual box. Yeah.
So what exactly is it?
Programming. It's Linux, which is an open source programming thing, and it's on a lot of microcontrollers and smaller computers, mainly used for my purposes for robotic applications.
Okay. Yeah, because I thought you guys were going to do a resume workshop. Because I know SHIP is.
Okay, so that could be happening at a different location. It is probably happening, if you believed it to be happening.
It said an email 162.
Maybe the Arkhurst room?
Yes, that's what I would suggest. Is the Ackhurst room is going to be when you walk in the front doors, it's the first room on your left.
So it's a fishbowl?
Yeah. No, the well, I don't call that the fishbowl.
I don't either.
I thought the fishbowl was the glass room in the study room.
I'm just learning all these nicknames. I know you guys have the dungeon, the fishbowl.
Maybe the dungeon. Like if you're
Well,
actually
the
walking in the building.
The dungeon is the one over by the machine shop.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, because it
Okay.
kind of fits.
Makes sense.
But so like if you go to the lobby, it's on the far corner. Is that door?
Of which side?
Like from the side you'll
Okay.
enter the lobby on. So you're gonna enter.
So you enter and then do you turn right or left?
It's a diagonal straight across.
Diagonal to
Like in between the two
right.
entrances.
Yeah, in between the two doors, basically.
Ah, okay, I see what you're saying. I see what
Yeah.
you're saying. That room there. I guess I'll check there.
Good luck.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if this is full screen, pretty much what you need to do is go to, if this is the best full screen that you got, what you want to do is click on Devices and click on Insert Guest Edition CD Image. And this is that other thing that we clicked on before. So you can see it's already starting. So it says, okay, would you like to run it? Yeah, we're going to go ahead and run that. And this is going to be the first time that it asks you to authenticate your password. So whatever password you put in when you were setting up your account name and your computer name, that you're going to want to remember. Make that something easy to use, because in Ubuntu specifically, you're going to be asked for that over and over and over again. We'll get more into why that is and how you kind of work within that framework in the beginning of the second part of this. But for right now, once this is done building, there'll be one more restart on this, and this part will be done. Cool. And you can see too, while this is going, you can see too how snappy this is. Like, this is pretty responsive. But Control-Alt-T is going to be what brings up a terminal window for you.
Right.
And then you can kind of just say, okay, there we go. It's running. So.
Virtual hard disk file.
Okay, this is done. Press enter and just come over here, exit, shut it down. And when I start it back up, sure. And you can see that now, this is the full screen, and in just a moment, this will pop to full screen. Yep, and there you go. Now you've got a full screen Ubuntu desktop environment for you to have your fun in. And this is the end of this part, and we'll come right back. Sorry, just one moment.
Yeah.
MCR or MRC?
It's N